The galaxy had rules. For 3,000 years, those rules had been absolute. When the Dominion spoke, species listened. When they demanded tribute, worlds complied. When they said kneel, entire civilizations fell to their knees without question. But the Dominion had never met humanity. They thought we were just another primitive species ripe for conquest. They expected us to bow our heads, accept their chains, and be grateful for the privilege of serving our betters. They had conquered 1,000 worlds with nothing more than a show of force and a list of demands. They were about to learn that some species don't kneel. Some species bite back. And some species, when pushed too far, will burn the entire galaxy down rather than live as slaves. The Dominion expected obedience. Humanity was about to deliver something far more dangerous. The fury of a species that had spent its entire history fighting for freedom and had never learned how to surrender. The massive Dominion dreadnought, Eternal Supremacy, hung in the void above Earth like a metal moon, its hull stretching 20 kilometers from bow to stern. Admiral Vextar stood on the command deck, his 6 arms folded behind his massive frame as he gazed down at the small blue world below. Through the transparent aluminum of the observation deck, Earth appeared peaceful, almost innocent in its simplicity. "Another primitive world," muttered Commander Zethal, her crimson scales catching the light from the ship's displays. "Look at them, still burning fossil fuels, still fighting among themselves. How do they even achieve spaceflight?" Vextar's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his species. The same way they all do eventually. Desperation drives innovation. But it matters little. By sunset, they will be another jewel in the Dominion's crown. The bridge crew worked efficiently around them, their various alien forms moving with practiced precision. Dominion ships were always crewed by representatives from dozens of conquered species, a living reminder of the Empire's reach. Each crew member wore the neural compliance collar that ensured absolute obedience. Their free will surrendered long ago in exchange for the privilege of serving their masters. "Communications," Vextar called out, his voice carrying the authority of 3 centuries of conquest. "Open a channel to the planet. Full spectrum broadcast. Ensure every receiver on that world can hear us." A tall, gray-skinned figure at the communication station nodded. "Channel open, Admiral." Vextar activated the translation matrix, a technology that would convert his words into every human language simultaneously. It was a tool of conquest refined over millennia, designed to ensure that no being could claim they didn't understand the terms of their surrender. "People of Earth," Vextar began, his voice broadcast across every television, radio, and internet connection on the planet below. "I am Admiral Vextar of the Dominion Third Fleet. Your world has been selected for integration into the Galactic Dominion. This is not a negotiation. This is not a request. This is an announcement of fact. On Earth, activity stopped. In New York, commuters froze on sidewalks as the voice echoed from every screen and speaker. In Beijing, factory workers looked up from their tasks. In Lagos, children playing in streets fell silent as their mothers gathered them close. Across the globe, 7 billion humans heard the same message in their own language, perfectly translated, utterly clear. "You will surrender your weapons," Vextar continued. "You will disband your militaries. You will submit to Dominion authority. In return, you will be protected, guided, and given purpose within our empire. You will serve as all enlightened species serve, and you will find peace in obedience." In the United Nations building, emergency sessions were being called. In the Pentagon, generals stared at screens showing the massive ship that had appeared without warning. In Moscow, London, and every capital city on Earth, leaders who had been enemies mere hours ago found themselves united by a common threat. "Your leaders will present themselves at these coordinates," Vextar said as orbital beacons began marking locations across Earth's surface. "They will formally surrender your world and accept the terms of integration. You have 48 of your hours to comply. After that time, compliance will be enforced through more direct methods." The transmission ended, leaving Earth in stunned silence. Commander Zethal flexed her claws, already anticipating the ceremony of conquest. How long do you think it'll take to surrender, Admiral? The last world took 18 hours. I'm wagering on less than 12 for this one. Vextar studied the tactical display showing Earth's infrastructure. Look at their weapon systems, he said, highlighting the planet's nuclear arsenal. Primitive fusion weapons, chemical propellants, crude orbital platforms. They have the tools to harm themselves, but nothing that could threaten us. I suspect they'll see reason quickly. What neither of them noticed was the frantic activity beginning in installations buried deep beneath Earth's surface, in facilities that didn't appear on any public records, where projects that officially didn't exist were suddenly receiving unlimited funding and authorization. Down on Earth, President Sarah Chun stood in the Situation Room, surrounded by the greatest military minds of every major nation. The room that had once hosted heated debates about trade deals and territorial disputes now buzzed with the desperate energy of a species facing extinction. Options, she said simply. General Morrison, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, looked grim. Nuclear option is off the table. Our biggest warheads wouldn't scratch that ship's hull, and they'd probably glass the entire planet in retaliation. Conventional military response? Asked President Volkov via secure connection from Moscow. Against a ship that size? We'd be throwing paper airplanes at a battleship, replied Marshal Zhang from Beijing. Dr. Elizabeth Harding, director of Advanced Research Projects, leaned forward. There might be another way. Every eye in the room turned to her. The elderly scientist had been involved in black projects for 40 years, working on technologies that pushed the boundaries of human understanding. Project Prometheus, she said quietly. We've been working on it for 15 years. Theoretical physics made real. We always knew this day might come. President Chun frowned. I've never heard of any Project Prometheus, because it doesn't officially exist. Deep Black, funded through shell programs, hidden even from oversight committees. We've been developing weapons based on principles that most scientists think are impossible. What kind of weapons? Morrison asked. Harding pulled up a secure tablet. Quantum entanglement torpedoes. Reality manipulation devices. Weapons that don't just destroy matter, they erase it from existence. We've been preparing for the day we'd meet something bigger than us. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The downside, Harding continued, is that we've only built prototypes. We have maybe a dozen functional units, and we've never tested them against alien technology. How long to deploy them? Chen asked. 6 hours to prep the orbital platforms. 12 hours to fully activate the quantum cascade systems. But if we're going to do this, we need to do it before they scan our planet more thoroughly. Right now, they think they know what we're capable of. High above, Admiral Vextar was reviewing the initial survey reports from his science teams. Interesting, he murmured, noting the unusual energy signatures his sensors were detecting. What is it, Admiral? Zethal asked. These humans have been busy. I'm reading some unusual quantum fluctuations from several locations. Nothing that appears threatening, but curious nonetheless. Should we investigate? Vextar waved a dismissive hand. Minor scientific curiosities. No species at their development level could pose a threat to Dominion technology. Continue the countdown. In 36 hours, this world will be ours. What he didn't realize was that those minor scientific curiosities were the result of humanity's greatest strength. The ability to prepare for threats that didn't yet exist, to imagine dangers, and build defenses against nightmares that might never come. For 15 years, a small group of human scientists had been asking themselves a simple question. What if we're not alone? And what if they're hostile? The answer to that question was now hidden in installations across Earth, waiting for activation. Dr. Harding made her way through the corridors of the Cheyenne Mountain Complex, past security checkpoints that required biometric scans, neural pattern verification, and quantum key authentication. Deep beneath the Colorado granite, in chambers that existed on no blueprint and were unknown to all but a handful of people, Project Prometheus hummed to life. The facility was a marvel of human engineering, a blend of conventional technology and theoretical physics made manifest. Quantum computers the size of buildings calculated probability matrices that shouldn't have been possible. Particle accelerators created exotic matter that existed for nanoseconds, but could be weaponized in those brief moments of existence. Status report. Harding called out as she entered the main control room. Dr. James Park, the project's lead physicist, looked up from a console that displayed equations in 4 dimensions. Prometheus 1 through 6 are online and ready. 7 through 12 need another 3 hours for quantum field alignment. Time to impact calculation. If they maintain current orbital position, 17 minutes from launch authorization to target elimination. Harding nodded. Begin final preparations. We're going to send these bastards a message they'll never forget. Meanwhile, in government buildings across Earth, humanity's leaders were making the hardest decision in their species' history. The Dominion had given them 48 hours to surrender. Instead, humanity was about to declare war on an empire that had conquered 1,000 worlds. In the Situation Room, President Chun addressed the assembled leaders via quantum-encrypted channels that the aliens couldn't intercept. Are we all in agreement? One by one, the leaders of every major nation confirmed their decision. Russia, China, the United States, the European Union, India, Japan, Brazil, and dozens of smaller nations all agreed on a course of action that would have been unthinkable 48 hours earlier. Then, God help us all, Chun said, because we're about to kick the biggest hornet's nest in the galaxy. Above Earth, Admiral Vextar was growing impatient. The initial fear response from the humans had been satisfying, but their governments hadn't yet sent representatives to the surrender points. In his experience, most species needed a small demonstration of power to overcome their initial shock. Commander, prepare a demonstration blast. Target one of their major cities. Minimal damage, maximum psychological impact. Which city, Admiral? Something visible from their orbital platforms. Show them that their space-based installations are as helpless as their surface facilities. The Dominion Dreadnought's primary weapon began to charge, a process that took several minutes for a ship of its size. Energy readings spiked across multiple spectrums as the massive vessel prepared to demonstrate the futility of resistance. That was when Prometheus 1 launched. The quantum entanglement torpedo didn't move through space in any conventional sense. Instead, it existed in a state of superposition simultaneously at its launch point and its target until the moment of impact collapsed the probability wave into a single reality. Admiral Vextar had exactly enough time to notice an impossible energy reading on his sensors before the torpedo rewrote the fundamental laws of physics in a small sphere around the Eternal Supremacy's forward weapons array. The explosion wasn't just destruction. It was erasure. A perfect sphere of nothing opened in the universe, swallowing a kilometer-long section of the dreadnought, and then sealing itself as if that matter had never existed at all. Emergency klaxons screamed across the Dominion ship as atmosphere rushed out through holes that led to absolute vacuum. The massive vessel lurched, its artificial gravity failing in several sections as power systems tried to compensate for the sudden loss of a third of its forward structure. Damage report. Vextar roared, his multiple arms working frantically at his command console. Impossible readings, Admiral, shouted the sensor operator. The forward cannon array simply isn't there anymore. Not destroyed, not damage gone, as if it never existed. Before Vextar could respond, Prometheus 2 and 3 launched simultaneously, targeting the ship's engine compartments. 2 more spheres of non-existence opened, severing the massive vessel's primary propulsion systems. The Eternal Supremacy, pride of the Dominion Third Fleet, began to tumble slowly through space, crippled by weapons that shouldn't have been possible. In the Cheyenne Mountain facility, Dr. Harding allowed herself a smile. Target has been neutralized. Prometheus 4 through 12 remain ready for additional targets. Admiral, Commander Zethal's voice was tight with disbelief. We're receiving another transmission from the planet. The view screen activated, showing President Chun standing in the Oval Office, flanked by military advisors and the flags of dozens of nations. "Admiral Vextar," she began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to say. "You seem to be under the impression that humanity is just another primitive species ready to kneel before your empire. Allow me to correct that misconception." Behind her, additional screens showed similar scenes from capitals around the world, as humanity's leaders presented a united front for the first time in their species' history. "We are not your subjects. We will not bow. We will not serve. And if you think you can simply take our world by force, you clearly haven't done your research on what happens when you threaten a species that has spent its entire evolutionary history fighting for survival." The transmission shifted, showing real-time footage of military installations across Earth coming online, revealing defensive systems that have been hidden for decades, weapons platforms that defied conventional understanding of physics. "You wanted to see our weapons?" Chun continued. "Those were just the appetizers. We have been preparing for this day for longer than you know, building defenses against threats we hoped we'd never face. You thought we were primitive. You thought we were helpless. You thought wrong." The image changed again, showing the crippled Dominion dreadnought tumbling through space. "Your ship was built to intimidate civilizations into surrender. Our weapons were built by a species that doesn't know how to surrender. So here's our counteroffer. Leave our system now, return to whatever hole you crawled out of, and tell your Dominion that Earth is off limits. Because if you don't, we'll show you exactly what happens when humanity stops playing defense and start playing offense." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the eternal supremacy in stunned silence. Admiral Vextar stared at the tactical display, showing his crippled ship, his mind trying to process what had just happened. In 3 centuries of conquest, he had never encountered resistance like this. Most species surrendered after the first demonstration of Dominion power. Some required a small show of force. None had ever struck back with weapons that could erase matter from existence. "Admiral," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving quantum burst transmissions from the Dominion core worlds. They're asking for a status report." Vextar realized he was facing a choice that no Dominion admiral had ever confronted: retreat from a primitive world that had just demonstrated it could destroy his ships, or escalate the conflict and risk losing his entire fleet to weapons he didn't understand. He thought of the 1,000 conquered worlds that had submitted without a fight, of the civilizations that had seen the inevitability of Dominion rule and accepted their fate with dignity. Then he thought of the impossible weapons that had just carved chunks out of his dreadnought, as if the laws of physics were merely suggestions. "Send a message to High Command," he said finally. "Tell them we've encountered an unexpected level of resistance. Request reinforcements." "How many ships, Admiral?" Vextar looked at the readings from the alien weapons, at the energy signatures that defied everything he knew about technology and warfare. "All of them," he said quietly. "Send all of them." As the crippled eternal supremacy limped away from Earth to await reinforcements, Admiral Vextar made the first of many mistakes he would come to regret. He assumed that humanity had shown him their best weapons, that the 3 torpedoes that had crippled his ship represented the full extent of their capabilities. He was about to learn that when humanity said they had been preparing for this day, they meant exactly that. And preparation was what humanity did best. The first battle was over. Humanity had sent a message that would echo across the galaxy. They were not prey. They were predators. And the Dominion had just made the fatal mistake of entering their territory without permission. The war that would reshape the galaxy was about to begin. 3 weeks after the first encounter, the Dominion fleet arrived at the edge of Earth's solar system like a plague of locusts. 247 ships of various classes, ranging from nimble frigates to massive dreadnoughts that dwarfed even the eternal supremacy. It was the largest fleet the Dominion had ever assembled for a single conquest, a show of force meant to crush any thoughts of resistance before they could take root. Fleet Admiral Caraxthal stood aboard the super dreadnought Divine Retribution, a vessel so large it could serve as a mobile space station. His scaled hide bore the scars of 100 battles, and his 4 eyes held the cold confidence of someone who had never known defeat. The reports from Admiral Vextar had been disturbing. Weapons that violated known physics, humans who fought back instead of surrendering. It was an anomaly that required correction. Tactical analysis, he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. The fleet's chief science officer, a multi-tentacled being from the water world of Akumari, manipulated holographic displays with practiced efficiency. The humans appear to have developed quantum manipulation technology, Admiral. The weapons that damage the eternal supremacy operate on principles we understand but considered impractical. Impractical how? The energy requirements should be impossible for a civilization at their development level. Each torpedo they fired required more power than their entire planet's electrical grid produces in a year. Korak Thul's mandibles clicked thoughtfully, yet they fired 3 of them in rapid succession. Precisely. Either they have developed energy generation technology far beyond what our scans indicate, or the science officer paused, tentacles writhing with uncertainty. Or they have been preparing for this encounter for far longer than seems possible. The infrastructure required to support such weapons would take decades to build, even with their crude technology. Before the Admiral could respond, alerts began sounding across the bridge. The sensor operators scrambled at their stations, confirming readings that seemed impossible. "Admiral," the primary sensor technician called out, his voice tight with disbelief. "I'm detecting massive energy buildups throughout the system, not just from Earth, everywhere." The tactical display activated, showing the solar system in 3 dimensions. Red dots began appearing, first a few, then dozens, then hundreds. Each dot represented an energy signature powerful enough to threaten a capital ship. "Impossible," whispered the science officer. "They've militarized their entire star system." Indeed, humanity had been busy during the 3 weeks since first contact. The asteroid belt now bristled with weapon platforms disguised as mining operations. Mars hosted launcher installations hidden beneath terraforming equipment. The gas giants' moons concealed shipyards that had been working around the clock to produce humanity's answer to Dominion superiority. On Earth, Dr. Harding stood in a command center that hadn't existed a month ago, buried 3 kilometers beneath the Swiss Alps. Around her, representatives from every major nation worked alongside scientists, military officers, and engineers who had dedicated their lives to a threat that most of the world had never known existed. "Status report on Operation Mjolnir," she called out. "All Prometheus platforms online," reported Dr. Park. 12 original units, plus 97 additional torpedoes manufactured in the last 3 weeks. Quantum cascade generators are showing green across the board. Thor's hammer batteries. Kinetic kill vehicles deployed throughout the asteroid belt. 234 launchers, each loaded with tungsten projectiles accelerated to 12% of light speed. Project Ragnarok. The solar collectors are at 97% efficiency. We're drawing power directly from the sun and channeling it through quantum conduits to weapon platforms throughout the system. Harding allowed herself a grim smile. Humanity had learned long ago that the best time to prepare for war was during peace. While other species developed art and philosophy after achieving spaceflight, humans had looked at the stars and asked themselves what they would do if something hostile came out of them. The answer was the greatest military buildup in human history, hidden from public knowledge and funded through black budgets that existed in the shadows of legitimate government spending. Aboard the Divine Retribution, Admiral Korak Thul was beginning to understand that he had drastically underestimated the situation. "Admiral," the communications officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the 3rd planet." On screen, the view screen activated, showing not the planetary leaders from the previous message, but a woman in military uniform standing in what appeared to be a military command center. Behind her, screens displayed tactical information and weapon readouts that made the Admiral's blood run cold. "I am General Sarah Martinez," Commanding officer of the Solar Defense Initiative, the woman began. 3 weeks ago, you received a warning to leave our system. Instead, you brought friends. That was a mistake. The display behind her shifted, showing real-time footage of weapon platforms throughout the solar system coming online. Massive energy weapons powered by solar collectors. Kinetic launchers that could accelerate projectiles to relativistic speeds. And something else, sleek ships that looked nothing like the primitive spacecraft the Dominion had observed during their initial survey. You see, Admiral, while you were calling for reinforcements, we were building them. The Terran Space Fleet consists of 42 vessels, each one designed specifically to kill ships like yours. We studied your technology during your first visit, analyzed your ship's construction, identified your weaknesses. The camera shifted, showing one of the human ships through an external view. It was smaller than a Dominion frigate, but built with angles and materials that seemed to bend light around them. They were obviously designed for stealth and speed, rather than the brute force approach favored by Dominion vessels. Our ships don't rely on heavy armor or massive size, Martinez continued. They rely on not being there when your weapons fire. They rely on hitting you with weapons you can't defend against from directions you can't predict. Admiral Korax Thull studied the human vessels with growing concern. They were built like nothing he had ever encountered, not meant to engage in the traditional ship-to-ship combat that had dominated galactic warfare for millennia, but designed to fight asymmetrically, using speed and stealth to negate the Dominion's advantage in firepower. You have one opportunity to avoid a war that will cost both our species dearly, Martinez said. Leave our system. Return to your empire. Tell them that Earth is protected by weapons they cannot defeat and defenders who will not surrender. Do this, and you can leave with your fleet intact. The transmission paused, and when it resumed, Martinez's expression had hardened. Or you could try to take our world by force. In which case, you'll discover exactly why humanity has never lost a war when our survival was at stake. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the divine retribution in tense silence. Admiral, the science officer said quietly, I'm reading quantum signatures consistent with what damaged the eternal supremacy, but the power levels are extraordinary. If my calculations are correct, they're drawing energy directly from their star and channeling it through space using technology we don't understand. Recommendations? Withdraw and request additional reinforcements, or attempt to negotiate terms that don't require planetary conquest. Korax Thull's 4 eyes blazed with fury. The Dominion had never retreated from a primitive world. The Empire's reputation was built on the certainty that resistance was futile, that any species that defied them would be crushed utterly. Begin the attack, he ordered. All ships, advance to optimal firing range. Prepare to demonstrate the price of defying the Dominion. The massive fleet began moving inward, weapons charging, shields raised to maximum. It was an awesome display of military might that had cowed 1,000 worlds. But as they advanced, the humans sprang their trap. The first wave of attacks came from the asteroid belt, not from visible weapon platforms, but from rocks that suddenly revealed themselves to be disguised missile batteries. Hundreds of projectiles launched simultaneously, each one a tungsten rod accelerated to 12% of light speed. The Dominion ships had shields designed to deflect energy weapons and stop conventional missiles. They were not designed to handle relativistic kinetic impactors that hit with the force of nuclear weapons. The first wave of projectiles punched through energy barriers as if they didn't exist and shattered hull plates that had never been breached by conventional weapons. 3 frigates simply disintegrated under the impact. 2 destroyers lost their forward sections and began spinning helplessly through space. Even the mighty dreadnoughts shuddered under impacts that their designers had never anticipated. Return fire, Korax Thull roared. Target the asteroid installations. The Dominion fleet's response was immediate and devastating. Energy beams that could glass planetary surfaces lanced out toward the asteroid belt, targeting the sources of the kinetic barrage. Massive explosions bloomed in space as rock and metal vaporized under the assault. But the humans had learned from centuries of warfare that the best defense was depth and redundancy. For every weapon platform the Dominion destroyed, two more revealed themselves and opened fire. The second wave of human attacks came from an unexpected direction, the outer system. The massive gas giants Jupiter and Saturn had concealed weapon platforms on their moons, devices that used the planet's gravity wells to accelerate projectiles to speeds that defied belief. More importantly, the moons had hidden the construction of something unprecedented in human history, a fleet of warships built for a war they had hoped never to fight. The first Terran destroyer, UNSS Defiance, came out of the shadow of Europa at a significant fraction of light speed. Its hull was coated with metamaterials that bent electromagnetic radiation around it, making it nearly invisible to Dominion sensors until it was already firing. The human ship didn't engage in the stately dance of traditional space combat. Instead, it struck like a viper, launching a full spread of Prometheus torpedoes before vanishing back into the gravity shadow of Jupiter's moon. The torpedoes struck a Dominion heavy cruiser amidships, and the alien vessel simply ceased to exist in three perfectly spherical sections. The remaining portions, suddenly separated by vacuum where their middle had been, spun away, trailing atmosphere and debris. What in the void was that? Koraxthal demanded. Unknown vessel, Admiral. It appeared on sensors for exactly 43 seconds before vanishing again. I'm reading quantum distortions consistent with stealth technology far beyond our capabilities. Before the Admiral could respond, alerts sounded across the fleet as more human ships revealed themselves. They struck from the asteroid belt, from behind moons, from the empty space between worlds where they had been hiding in perfect silence. Each attack lasted only minutes before the human ships vanished again, leaving burning Dominion vessels in their wake. This wasn't the type of warfare the Dominion understood. For millennia, they had fought enemies who met them in open space, shield against shield, beam against beam. The humans fought like ghosts, appearing only long enough to kill before disappearing back into the darkness between worlds. Admiral, the tactical officer, reported, "We've lost 18 ships in the last 40 minutes. The human vessels are using hit-and-run tactics. They're not engaging in sustained combat." "Then we force them to fight," Koraxthal growled. "All ships advance to the third planet. If they want to play games, we'll threaten what they're trying to protect." It was exactly the wrong decision. As the Dominion fleet pushed deeper into the solar system, they entered the range of Earth's fixed defenses. Weapon platforms that had been disguised as communication satellites suddenly revealed their true nature. Solar collectors that had been hidden on the dark side of the moon focused stellar energy into coherent beams that could cut through capital ship armor like tissue paper. Most terrifying of all was Project Ragnarok itself, a network of orbital mirrors that could focus the entire energy output of Sol into a single devastating beam. The beam lasted only 30 seconds, but when it ended, the super dreadnought Divine Retribution was drifting dead in space, its hull superheated to the point where metal flowed like water. Admiral Koraxthal and his entire command staff were vapor. Command of the Dominion fleet fell to Admiral Vashti aboard the dreadnought Inexorable Will. She was younger than Koraxthal, but she was also more flexible in her thinking. The reports she was receiving painted a picture of an enemy unlike anything the Dominion had ever faced. "Analysis," she ordered. "They're using our own doctrine against us," reported her tactical officer. "We rely on overwhelming force applied at a single point. They're using our concentration against us, hitting us from multiple directions with weapons designed to exploit the weaknesses in ships built for traditional combat. What are our options? We can withdraw and report that this world is defended by technology we cannot counter, or we can attempt to adapt our tactics to match theirs." Vashti studied the tactical display, showing the scattered remains of what had once been the most powerful fleet in Dominion history. In less than 2 hours of combat, they had lost 37 ships to an enemy they couldn't pin down and couldn't predict. Send a message to the human leadership, she decided. Inform them that we are prepared to discuss terms. The reply came not from Earth's government, but from General Martinez in the hidden command center beneath the Alps. Admiral Vashti, the general began, I hope you now understand what happens when you threaten a species that has been preparing for this day for decades. Your predecessor chose to ignore our warnings. You now have the opportunity to be smarter than he was. The camera pulled back to show the full command center, revealing the scope of humanity's preparation. Screens displayed weapon systems throughout the solar system, ship positions, energy readings that suggested even more devastating weapons waiting to be deployed. Humanity offers you the same choice we offered your predecessor. Leave our system and don't return. In exchange, we'll allow your surviving ships to depart intact. Refuse, and we'll demonstrate weapons that make everything you've seen so far look like fireworks. The transmission paused, and Martinez leaned forward. But understand this, Admiral. Win or lose, word of this battle is already spreading throughout the galaxy. Other species are learning that the Dominion can be fought, that your ships can be destroyed, that your empire is not invincible. She smiled, and there was something predatory in the expression. You wanted to conquer humanity. Instead, you just taught the galaxy how to fight back. Every species you've oppressed, every world you've enslaved, they're all going to hear about what happened here. And some of them are going to start wondering if they need to stay conquered. The transmission ended, leaving Admiral Vashti to contemplate a future where the Dominion's greatest strength, the fear of their invincibility, had been shattered by a species that was supposed to have surrendered without a fight. She was about to make a decision that would change the course of galactic history. But unknown to her, humanity had already set in motion events that would spread far beyond a single star system. During the weeks of preparation, human ships had been carrying a very different kind of weapon to every corner of the galaxy: information. The galaxy was about to learn that the Dominion could bleed. And once that lesson spread, there would be no containing what came next. 6 months after the Battle of Sol, the galaxy was burning. It started small, as revolutions always do. A mining colony in the Vega system refused to meet its tribute quotas. A transport convoy in the Centauri sector was attacked by ships using weapons no one recognized. Agricultural worlds began reporting crop failures that were clearly sabotage. At first, the Dominion High Command dismissed these incidents as isolated unrest, the kind of minor rebellions that flared up occasionally and were easily crushed. But then the pattern became clear. The rebels were using human weapons, human tactics, human strategy. In the 3 months following humanity's victory at Sol, fast courier ships had raced to every corner of the galaxy, carrying a cargo more dangerous than any weapon: hope. The ships carried detailed technical specifications for Prometheus torpedoes, quantum stealth systems, and kinetic bombardment platforms. More importantly, they carried something the galaxy hadn't seen in 3,000 years: proof that the Dominion could be defeated. Admiral Vashti, now the most senior surviving Dominion officer after the Sol debacle, stood in the war room of Dominion's Central Command on the fortress world of Typhos Prime. Around her, holographic displays showed the scope of the crisis. Red indicators marked rebellion across 47 star systems. Entire sectors had gone dark, their tribute ships either destroyed or captured by insurgent forces. Status report, she demanded, though she already knew the answer would be grim. General Korthax, commander of Dominion ground forces, gestured to the tactical display. We've lost contact with the Rigel sector entirely. The last transmission indicated coordinated attacks on all Dominion installations using weapons consistent with human technology. Human technology that shouldn't exist outside their system, Vashti pointed out grimly. The humans have been busy, admitted Intelligence Director Mexith, her tentacles writhing with agitation. Our analysis suggests they've been secretly distributing weapon specifications to resistance movements throughout the galaxy. Not just the plans, actual functioning prototypes. How is that possible? Sol system is under full quarantine. Apparently, the quarantine isn't as effective as we believed. Human ships have been detected in 17 different systems, all using stealth technology that renders them effectively invisible to our sensors until they choose to reveal themselves. Vashti studied the display, showing the spreading rebellion. The humans hadn't just defended their world, they had deliberately ignited a galactic war. And they were winning. On Earth, General Martinez stood in the same command center where she had first confronted the Dominion fleet. But now the displays showed something unprecedented: real-time intelligence from across the galaxy. Human ships, operating in perfect stealth, had established a communication network that allowed Earth to coordinate with rebel forces on worlds thousands of light years away. Report from the Antares cell called out Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kim from the communication station. They've successfully destroyed the Dominion shipyard using modified Prometheus torpedoes. Estimates suggest they eliminated 60% of the sector fleet's logistics capability. Excellent. What about the Procyon operation? Complete success. The Liberation Fleet has freed 3 agricultural worlds and captured 2 Dominion supply convoys. They're requesting additional quantum cascade generators for their next operation. Dr. Harding, now serving as Director of Galactic Operations, reviewed the intelligence summaries flowing in from human reconnaissance ships. We've confirmed active resistance movements in 83 systems. Of those, 47 have successfully implemented human weapon technologies, and the others? Waiting for equipment or training. The Prometheus manufacturing facilities on Luna are working at maximum capacity, but demand far exceeds production. Martinez nodded thoughtfully. This had always been the plan, though few had believed it would work so well. Humanity had studied the Dominion for decades through intercepted communications and long-range observation. They had identified the Empire's fundamental weakness. It was built on fear and the assumption of technological superiority. Once that assumption was shattered, once subject species realized they could fight back effectively, the entire structure would collapse. The humans had simply provided the spark and the tools. The oppressed worlds of the galaxy had provided the fury. Status on the Prometheus fleet? Martinez asked. Commander Torres, liaison with the new Terran Space Navy, consulted his tactical display. All 42 ships are operational and deployed throughout the galaxy. The UNSS Liberation is currently supporting operations in the Tau Ceti system. The UNSS Retribution has eliminated a Dominion patrol squadron in the Wolf 359 sector. Casualties? Minimal. The Dominion still hasn't adapted to our tactical approach. They continue to deploy traditional formations against ships they can't detect until we're already firing. The human strategy was elegant in its simplicity. Rather than attempting to match the Dominion ship for ship, humanity had built a fleet designed to teach others how to fight. Each Terran vessel carried not just weapons, but technical specialists, equipment, and training materials. They would arrive at a world with an active resistance movement, provide advanced weapons and tactical training, then disappear before Dominion reinforcements could arrive. It was a force multiplier approach that had turned isolated rebel cells into coordinated insurgencies across the galaxy. Back on Typhos Prime, the Dominion High Command was struggling with a type of war they had never encountered. Supreme Chancellor Thexmore, ruler of the Dominion for over 2 centuries, listened to the reports with growing disbelief. "Explain to me," he said in a voice that had sentenced worlds to destruction, "how a single primitive species has managed to destabilize an empire that has stood for 3 millennia. Admiral Vashti stood at attention, knowing that her next words might determine whether she lived or died. "The humans didn't just resist us, Chancellor. They planned for us. Everything we've seen suggests they've been preparing for galactic war for decades before we even knew they existed. Impossible. Our surveys indicated a barely space-capable species with primitive nuclear technology. That was what they wanted us to see," Director Mexith interjected. "Intelligence analysis suggests the humans deliberately concealed their true capabilities. The installations we observed as mining operations and research facilities were actually military production sites. The primitive space platforms were weapon systems designed to appear harmless. Chancellor Thexmore's massive form shifted on the command throne that had been the seat of absolute power for 30 centuries. Are you suggesting that this species has been planning war against an empire they hadn't yet encountered? Not war against us specifically, Vashti clarified. War against any potentially hostile species. Human strategic thinking appears to focus on preparing for threats that don't yet exist. They call it contingency planning. And now they're sharing those contingencies with every rebel movement in the galaxy. Worse than that, Chancellor, they're not just sharing weapons technology. They're teaching strategy, tactics, coordination. The rebellions we're facing aren't random uprisings anymore. They're coordinated military operations planned and executed with human expertise. The Chancellor was silent for a long moment, processing the implications. The Dominion had controlled the galaxy for 3,000 years through superior technology, and the certainty that resistance was futile. Now, they faced an enemy that had deliberately negated their technological advantage and was systematically destroying the fear that held their empire together. Options, he demanded. We could attempt negotiation, Vashti suggested carefully. The humans have demonstrated they're not interested in conquest, only in defending their independence and helping others achieve theirs. Perhaps terms could be reached. Unacceptable. The Dominion does not negotiate with primitives. Then, we escalate, General Korthax rumbled. Deploy the Omega Protocol weapons. Demonstrate that rebellion leads to extinction. The Omega Protocol was the Dominion's ultimate deterrent, planet-killing weapons that could sterilize entire worlds. They had been used only rarely in the Empire's history, but the threat of their deployment had prevented most rebellions from gaining momentum. The humans would see that as an act of total war, Mexith warned. Their response could be significant. What could they possibly do that they haven't already done? Before anyone could answer, alarms began sounding throughout the command center. The massive defensive platforms orbiting Typhos Prime, weapons designed to protect the Dominion's capital world from any conceivable attack, were detecting impossible energy signatures. Report, the Chancellor demanded. The sensor operator's voice was tight with disbelief. I'm reading quantum distortions throughout the system. Multiple contacts appearing at impossible ranges. Sir, I think we're under attack. On the primary display, contacts began appearing throughout the Typhos system. Not dozens, but hundreds. Ships that materialized out of empty space as their stealth systems deactivated, revealing a fleet unlike anything the Dominion had ever faced. At the center of the formation was a vessel that dwarfed even the largest Dominion dreadnoughts, the UNSS Terra, humanity's first and only superdreadnought. Designed after studying the wreckage of the Divine Retribution, it was everything the human fleet philosophy opposed. Massive, heavily armed, and built to inspire fear. But it wasn't alone. Surrounding it were ships from a dozen different species, all armed with human weapons, all moving in perfect coordination. The galaxy's oppressed peoples had built their own fleet, and they had come to settle accounts with their former masters. This is Admiral Sarachon of the Terran Liberation Fleet, came the transmission that reached every screen and speaker on Typhos Prime. We're here to accept your surrender, Chancellor Thexmore. The view shifted to show the bridge of the UNSS Terra, where Admiral Chin stood, surrounded by representatives from species across the galaxy. Behind her, tactical displays showed the scope of the fleet. 800 ships from 43 different worlds, united in a single purpose. For 3,000 years, your empire has crushed any species that dared resist you. You've enslaved worlds, destroyed cultures, and convinced the galaxy that your rule was inevitable. Today, that ends. Chancellor Thexmore's voice boomed across the communication channel. You dare threaten the Dominion capital? This world is protected by defensive systems that could destroy your entire fleet. You mean these defensive systems? The display shifted to show the massive orbital weapons platforms that protected Typhos Prime. As the camera watched, the platforms began to explode in sequence, destroyed by Prometheus torpedoes fired by ships that had infiltrated the defensive perimeter undetected. Or perhaps you meant your fleet? Another view showed the Dominion home fleet, the most powerful naval force in the galaxy, as human stealth ships materialized in their midst and began systematic destruction with quantum weapons. Chancellor, Admiral Chen continued, your empire's greatest weakness was never military. It was philosophical. You believed that power came from fear, that control came from strength. But you never understood that there's something more powerful than fear: hope. Around Typhos Prime, the Liberation Fleet had formed a perfect sphere, every weapon aimed at the planet that had been the seat of galactic oppression for millennia. Humanity didn't just give the galaxy weapons, Chen explained. We gave them something they hadn't had in 3,000 years. Proof that tyrants can fall. Proof that freedom is possible. Proof that no empire, no matter how powerful, is permanent. The transmission paused, and when it resumed, Chen's voice carried the weight of history. Your empire is finished, Chancellor. Not because we're stronger than you, but because the galaxy has remembered something you made them forget. They outnumber you 1,000,000,000,000. And we've taught them how to fight. Across the galaxy, the rebellion was reaching its climax. On 1,000 worlds, Dominion garrisons found themselves under attack by local forces using weapons that could punch through any defense. Fleets that had enforced the peace for centuries discovered that their opponents could appear from nowhere and vanish before retaliation was possible. Most importantly, the network of fear that had held the empire together was finally broken. Species that had submitted to Dominion rule for millennia were suddenly attacking their oppressors with the fury of 3,000 years of suppressed rage. What are your terms? Chancellor Thexmore asked, his voice hollow with defeat. Dissolution of the Dominion military. Liberation of all conquered worlds. Reparations for the species you've oppressed. And trial for those responsible for the worst atrocities. And if I refuse? Admiral Chun gestured to the tactical display showing the Liberation Fleet surrounding Typhos Prime. Then, this system becomes the first example of what happens to worlds that choose oppression over freedom. The Chancellor looked around the command center at officers who had served the Empire faithfully for centuries, all of them now staring at displays that showed the complete collapse of everything they had believed in. He began, then stopped. The words wouldn't come. For 3 millennia, the Dominion had never surrendered, never retreated, never acknowledged the possibility of defeat. I accept your terms, he said finally. The formal surrender took place aboard the UNSS Terra, with representatives from every liberated world bearing witness. Chancellor Thexmore signed documents that dissolved the government he had ruled for 2 centuries, ending an empire that had dominated the galaxy for 3,000 years. But more than the empire had ended, the galaxy itself had changed. Species that had been enemies discovered they could work together. Worlds that had been isolated learned they were part of a larger community. The technology humans had shared didn't just serve military purposes. Quantum communication networks allowed instant coordination across vast distances, while advanced manufacturing techniques helped struggling worlds build better lives for their people. General Martinez, now serving as Earth's ambassador to the new Galactic Federation, stood in the same command center where the war had begun. The displays now showed something unprecedented in galactic history: 1,000 worlds working together as equals, sharing technology and knowledge, building something better than any empire. Status report, she said, smiling at how different the words sounded now. The last Dominion holdout surrendered this morning, reported Commander Kim. The Zirian system has agreed to join the Federation. That makes it unanimous. Every world that was part of the Dominion has chosen freedom over isolation. What about reconstruction efforts? Proceeding ahead of schedule. Worlds that were strip-mined for resources are seeing their first new cities in centuries. Species that were scattered by Dominion policies are finally returning home. Dr. Harding, now Director of Technological Exchange, reviewed the latest reports from Federation scientists. The collaborative research projects are exceeding all projections. When you combine human innovation with Antarean mathematics, Rigelian engineering, and Procyon computational theory, the results are extraordinary. We're on the verge of breakthroughs in faster-than-light communication, matter replication, and quantum manufacturing. Martinez nodded with satisfaction. This too had been part of humanity's long-term strategy. They had never intended to rule the galaxy. They had intended to free it, because a galaxy of free worlds working together could achieve things that no empire ever could. Any word from the exploration fleets? The deep space missions have confirmed what we suspected, Commander Torres reported. There are other galaxies out there, other civilizations. Some friendly, some not so much. Martinez smiled. Then, I suppose we'd better keep preparing. Because that was what humanity did best. Prepare for threats that didn't yet exist, build defenses against dangers that might never come. They had done it for the Dominion, and now they would do it for whatever challenges awaited in the vast universe beyond their galaxy. The Dominion had expected obedience and received war. But more than that, they had expected to face a primitive species and instead encountered something far more dangerous. A species that had turned the art of war into a science and the defense of freedom into a cause that could unite the galaxy. Humanity had delivered more than war. They had delivered revolution, liberation, and hope to a galaxy that had forgotten such things were possible. And as the new Federation ships spread throughout the galaxy, carrying human technology and human ideals to worlds that had never known freedom, one thing became clear. The age of empires was over. The age of cooperation had begun. The galaxy would never be the same. And that was exactly what humanity had intended.